When Daniel Carter stepped off the Greyhound bus in his hometown of Willow Creek, Ohio, the station looked smaller than he remembered. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the old clock above the ticket counter still showed the wrong time. He carried one duffel bag, faded and heavy, holding everything he owned after 8 years in the U.S. Army. There was no one waiting for him, no hugs, no flags waving. The silence felt louder than the gunfire he had left behind overseas, and for the first time since his discharge, Daniel wondered if coming home had been a mistake. He walked down Main Street slowly, boots scraping the cracked pavement. Many of the shops were closed, their windows dark and dusty. The diner where he once worked summers had a "for sale" sign taped crookedly to the glass. As he passed familiar places, memories surfaced like ghosts, laughing with friends, holding his high school sweetheart's hand, dreaming about a future that felt so certain back then. Now those dreams felt borrowed, like they belonged to someone else. People he passed didn't recognize him, and he realized how much time had taken away. Daniel's childhood home stood at the end of Oak Street, but when he reached it, his chest tightened. The house was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. A notice from the city flapped in the wind, warning of unpaid taxes and demolition. His parents had died while he was deployed, his mother from illness, his father months later from grief and a failing heart. The letters had come late, and by the time Daniel could respond, everything had already been lost. He stood there for a long time, gripping the strap of his duffel bag, feeling numb. He had imagined sleeping in his old room, hearing the familiar creak of the stairs, smelling his mother's cooking. Instead, there was only dirt and silence. Neighbors watched from behind curtains but didn't come out. Daniel didn't blame them. He looked tired, older than his 32 years, with eyes that carried stories no one wanted to hear. Eventually, the cold pushed him away, and he turned back toward town with nowhere to go. That first night, Daniel slept on a bench near the river, using his jacket as a blanket. The water moved steadily, indifferent to his thoughts. He barely slept, jolting awake at every sound, his body still trained for danger. Memories of desert nights and lost friends crept into his mind. He thought of Marcus, who never made it home, and of promises whispered under the stars that felt broken now. Daniel had survived war, but survival didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like being left behind after everyone else moved on. The next morning, he went to the local veterans office, a small building tucked behind the courthouse. The woman at the desk looked at him kindly but with exhaustion in her eyes. She explained that resources were limited, waiting lists long, and funding tight. She gave him pamphlets and phone numbers, all leading to more waiting. Daniel nodded politely, thanked her, and left. He wasn't angry at her, he was angry at the system that praised soldiers while forgetting them once the uniforms came off. Days passed, each blending into the next. Daniel found occasional work unloading trucks at night for cash, his muscles grateful for the familiar strain. He ate cheap meals and avoided mirrors. The town felt like a place he no longer belonged to, yet it was the only place he knew. Sometimes he sat by the river and watched families walk by, children laughing, parents complaining about small things. He envied them, not for their happiness, but for their sense of place in the world, something he felt he had lost. One afternoon, while resting outside the closed diner, Daniel met an old man named Henry who volunteered at the local church. Henry had served in Vietnam and recognized the look in Daniel's eyes without needing an explanation. They talked quietly, sharing coffee from a paper cup. Henry didn't offer pity, only understanding. He told Daniel about a small room behind the church that was sometimes used to help veterans get back on their feet. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and for Daniel, warmth felt like hope. Living behind the church gave Daniel a routine. He helped with repairs, cleaned the grounds, and assisted with food drives. The work was simple, but it mattered. Slowly, people began to learn his name. Some thanked him for his service, others just smiled. At night, he still struggled with memories, but the walls around him made the darkness feel less endless. He started attending group meetings with other veterans, listening to stories that sounded painfully familiar. For the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. As weeks turned into months, Daniel began to rebuild pieces of himself. He applied for training programs, learned new skills, and saved what little money he earned. It wasn't easy, and setbacks were frequent, but he kept moving forward. One day, he stood again at the empty lot where his house once stood. This time, the sight didn't crush him. It reminded him that while the past was gone, it didn't have to define what came next. Loss had shaped him, but it hadn't ended him. Eventually, Daniel found steady work as a mechanic's assistant, a job that valued discipline and attention to detail. He rented a small apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors, but it was his. He hung his discharge papers carefully inside a drawer, not as a reminder of glory, but of endurance. The town still felt different, but he was different too. He understood now that home wasn't a building or a place frozen in memory, it was something you built again, piece by piece. On a quiet evening, Daniel walked by the river once more, watching the sunset reflect on the water. He thought about everything he had lost and everything he had gained in unexpected ways. He still carried pain, but he also carried strength. The soldier who had come home to nothing had learned how to start from zero. And in that realization, Daniel finally felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace, fragile but real, growing steadily within him.